So this is Warhammer 40k Boltgun. It's just come out today, and I've been putting a fair few hours in, and from what I've played so far, it's a really cool game, and it has some awesome ideas that make it very unique and stand out in modern day games. It's not perfect, it's a bit rough around the edges, but today I wanted to give you simply my initial thoughts and a bit of a gameplay showcase. What's good, what's bad, what's the deal with us always playing goddamn Ultramarines? I talked about this in my initial video about what the game is a couple of weeks ago before it came out, and a lot of you in the comments agreed with me that it would have been really nice to see a whole bunch of other chapters or legions actually explored in the gaming side of things aside from the Ultramarines. But either way, I will happily accept any Warhammer game, but there are a bunch of other things that I think could be improved on or potentially added to the game in order to make it a little bit more accepting towards people who aren't Warhammer fans. Either way, let's dive into the retro boomer shooter that is Boltgun. So this game is actually connected to the events of Space Marine 1 quite loosely. It actually came out like in 2011, and it's finally getting a sequel this year, so I think Games Workshop just kind of forgot about it for ages, but they're trying to kind of restart the whole hype train by having this game be loosely connected, because there isn't a big focus on the story. It is very vague, and it's just, okay, you're on the planet that was just the aftermath of the events of Space Marine 1, and you just have to try to collect a fragment of the power source that was mentioned in the first game. And it's a forge world, there's lots of chaos, there's demons, it's, a whole bunch of enemies. It's not very complicated, there's not anything else you need to know. That's it. So it's basically just, everything's on fire, lots of bad guys, the dance moves, pick a target, blast it to smithereens, good job, gold star, rinse and repeat. The difference about this game is quite clear from the start. It's designed as a retro shooter, which is supposed to be a bit more of a callback to the original Doom games, which I just love. I think that it's really cool to have this aesthetic, and I also like that they lean quite heavily into it. If it's not exactly your cup of tea, though, don't stress, because there is a pixelation slider, so you can determine just how much you want to go back in time when playing the game. It runs buttery smooth. It was a very short installation. The movement is very refined. It feels like a modern day sort of movement system. It's pretty flexible. Some weapons will make you feel sluggish because they hit hard. Other weapons you'll be a lot more mobile with, so that's really nice. The weapon variety is great. Enemy variety, not so much. By about halfway through the game, you've seen all the enemies that you will, and the rest of it is just the same thing in slightly different scenarios. The taunting that you can do after a kill is a really nice touch. Like, as soon as I found that button, my playthrough became immensely more fun, because I was just becoming Duke Nukem and pressing that taunt button every time after I got a kill, and it was fantastic. I think that if you're a Warhammer 40k fan, this game is going to appeal to you in some degree, because it does fit in with the franchise quite nicely. Also, a lot of us Warhammer fans aren't 12 years old, and we weren't raised on modern day games where graphics is the main focus. A lot of us were brought up on slightly older games where the gameplay was what was more important. And I genuinely think that this game is a pretty good stand-in for Warhammer fans, but if you're not a fan of the franchise, it isn't very welcoming. I think the overall game, look, it is a little bit simplistic, but it's a fun ride. It doesn't lie to you or mislead you about what it is. The game is exactly what you would expect. It is a little short, and there isn't a lot of variety in the combat by the end, so most Warhammer fans, I would say, you'll have a good time, and you'll find it's worth the, relatively small price for a few hours of genuine awesome blood, guts, and badass one-liners. The game has a lot of personality. You can tell when you see those taunts that the character uses. They're funny, they're awesome, and they relate to the setting. And when you're not playing and you're just sitting there, he'll stop and actually pull out a book and start reading it. And as a Warhammer fan, I can already guess that this Ultramarine Boy Scout is probably sitting there in the middle of a battlefield reading the Codex Astartes because he has a few seconds. So that's fantastic, and you can tell that the people who made this game are actual, genuine Warhammer fans. But I think that a couple of decisions were a little too focused on being retro. My problems with the game are, I don't know if I'm going to be alone in this, but I think there's a couple of small quality of life issues that do end up making my experience a little bit annoying. Because in this game, you have to go through various levels by finding keys to unlock other areas. The problem is that because you have that older art style, a lot of the corridors and areas of maps, they look very similar to me. And especially for the backtracking that you have to do, it can be pretty frustrating if you have to look around all the time to try and get your bearings on which areas you have been into and which areas you need to go into next. Just having a simple map would go a really long way towards making that a whole lot easier to track for where you've been and where you have access to and where you don't have access to. I think that that would have been a very smart addition, but they didn't do that. The other thing as well is that I would have really liked it if this game explained one or two more things before it thrust you into the middle of it all. Like I mentioned earlier, the taunts are awesome, but I didn't know that they were a thing until I finished the first chapter of the game, because the game doesn't tell you the control layout, you have to just look it up. I know, small issue, doesn't really matter, but when you have a mechanic for the game that you don't actually tell players and they have to find it in the help screen, then I do have a bit of a problem with that. Because a lot of enemies in this game have different levels of toughness, and depending on what weapon you have, some will be more effective than others. And the game doesn't tell you that. You have to either figure it out from trial and error, or you have to just look it up in the help screen. And not a lot of people are going to do that. So that's something that I think would have been sensible to explain to people beforehand, but the game doesn't. But that's kind of my initial impressions for the game. I think that there's a lot of things that it does quite nicely, and it has a cool aesthetic and a very nice retro throwback feel to it. But it is, like I said, rough around the edges. But that's pretty much about it for today. So I hope that you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, and you want to see more content like this about Warhammer games, then make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. I've been Kiv, and I will see you all on the next one.